It's up to you, Lynn.
Okay. All right, well, let's get started then. And I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Lynn Beckner, and I am a volunteer at the Manitou Springs Heritage Center. And I'd like to welcome everybody to today's online event. It's called The History Behind Time Springs Eternal. And this is actually the 10th in a series of online events that we've hosted here at the Heritage Center. This event's being recorded and it will be later available on our YouTube channel. There's about an hour and a half allocated to this event, but we're probably going to keep it just to an hour. But we're happy to go over that if there's a lot of questions at the end. Before we introduce today's guest, I'd like to cover a couple of events upcoming at the Heritage Center. And tickets are still available for the Mother's Day brunch on May 9th at the Craftwood Inn. This is an elegant place to take mom, and they have a wonderful gourmet breakfast. And the music will be provided by Wayne Hammerstadt. He's a classical guitarist. Tickets are available on our Manitou Springs Heritage Center website, and they're being sold by the table this year. As you can imagine, for COVID restrictions, it's intended to celebrate safely with your loved ones at each table. So the tickets are, for a table of 4, it's $140. For a table of 6, it's $210, and for a table of 8, it's $280. Secondly, founded in 1921, we have the Manitou Springs Kiwanis Club celebrating their 100th anniversary, and we're putting on a free event on site at the Heritage Center. The event will feature historical highlights and membership events, kind of like this picture here of the 1940 Easter egg hunt, which they're still doing. Scholarships, memorable presidents over the years, the international humanitarian projects that the club gets involved in, and the local children's clubs like Builders Club from the middle school, Key Club from the high school, and the Boy Scouts. And these clubs really teach leadership and community service skills that last a lifetime. The exhibit itself is just in multimedia, and it will be launched simultaneously online. And we expect the exhibit on site to be available for about 6 months at the museum. And finally, we have our wildly popular Brewfest back this year for a 6th year. We weren't able to have it last year due to COVID, but tickets are on sale now. And because, again, we're limited to only 500 people, the tickets are going fast. And I got to tell you, I went to the 2019 event, and it was so much fun. They have 20 local breweries serving up samples all day long, and there's 3 live bands that are joining us this year, and there is food for purchase. And I would just ask, be safe and use ride-share services, but do know that there's also a designated driver ticket available. So today's presentation will be broken down in 3 sections. First, we'll do a short historical topics interview. Then we'll have a writing process interview, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. And again, to minimize the disruption, if you have a question, we'd like you to enter it into chat if you could, and that's done by the chat icon in the bottom of the screen. And then your chat box will pop up. Where can I buy the book? Well, if you haven't read it, you can buy it in our on-site bookstore at the museum, which we're now reopening as of May 1st. We also have a website store. If you live on Facebook, we have a Facebook store. And we also have what we call the Manitou Made storefront, and that's a portal that was born a few months ago, and it features a lot of different Manitou merchants. The book is also available on Amazon. So I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today. And she was raised in the South, although her family is from Wyoming and Colorado. And she has an affinity for this area of the West. She lived in Colorado Springs in the late 1990s and just fell in love with Manitou like we all have. And Rutherford reached out to the Heritage Center a few months ago for historical details to help write her new historical fiction novel, which is the topic of today's event, called Time Springs Eternal. And she actually had this novel in her head for about 10 years now and carried around a bucket list item that says, write your novel on it. And finally, in 2020, she says the story itself insisted on being told. And we're glad it did, because Time Springs Eternal is a delightful story and it's receiving great reviews. Has a little bit something for everyone, I thought, when I read it. So it's my pleasure to introduce Rutherford Case. And Ms. Case, if you can start out just by telling us a little bit about the book.
Thank you, Lynn. I'd like to say a couple things. I want to thank the Manitou Springs Heritage Center for having me today. It's really exciting for me to be here. And thanks to all the folks that have joined this call today. I'm looking forward to the discussion. And I also want to, Lynn and Neil, thank you personally for your support in this process as well. And I do want to have a disclaimer. I know there are folks that potentially are in the audience who know a lot more about the local Manitou history and the history of Colorado than I do. I'm not primarily an historian. I'm primarily a storyteller that uses historical context as a backdrop for the story. So I've done quite a lot of research, as we'll talk about today, but I am not an expert. So if I get something wrong, please forgive me. It's not my primary area of expertise. So, but I do thank you for the time today.
You want to tell us a little bit about what the book is about?
Oh yeah, that was your question, wasn't it? The book is essentially about a woman, a modern woman, who is wrapped up in her career and her life, and she's very much looking forward to her future with her boyfriend that she's planning finally to marry. Goes back home to Colorado Springs for some wedding planning, and they take the day off to go to Cave of the Winds. And through a happenstance there, she is rendered unconscious. And when she wakes up, she finds she's been sent back to 1882. And the story, launches from there. She's got a little mystery she has to solve. But mostly the book is about, a woman coping with being out of place and time.
Okay, very interesting. All right, so then I have a couple questions for you.
Sure.
What really inspired you to create the Time Springs Eternal series?
The inspiration for a mystery series hit me when I was actually living in Colorado Springs. And there was this is morbid, but there was a body found in the pond of the Broadmoor Hotel one time while I was there. And that just kind of triggered in me this idea of, it would be kind of interesting to have a mystery series where bodies show up at notable locations around the Colorado Springs area, like the Broadmoor or the Air Force Academy, or maybe the Olympic Center. And then, so that was the kernel of the inspiration, but that kind of went by the wayside for several years. And in the interim, I started becoming interested in maybe putting it into a different time. So I had the idea of putting it back in time, but it wasn't until, if you want to show the next slide, it wasn't until August of 2011 that I got the real inspiration for it to be somewhat of a time travel book. Because that day, and I happened to be spending a lot of time working in DC at this point in my life. Could you go back one? Thank you.
Sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, so I was spending a lot of time in DC. I didn't happen to be there on this particular day, August 23rd, but I was aware of it and the damage that it did to the surrounding area, most notably the Washington Monument, which was in scaffolding for like 3 years after that, being renovated from the damage. But that same day, there was also an earthquake in southern Colorado. And that's what gave me the idea of an earthquake being the mechanism to send a person back in time. So if you can go to the next slide, I started doing some homework. I knew there were other earthquakes in Colorado. I happened to have been in a little tremor when I was a child when visiting family in Denver. So I thought, oh, I know there have been earthquakes in Colorado. So what about other earthquakes? And I'll be darned, I just found this like almost divine intervention, really, because I found that the largest earthquake on record in Colorado actually happened November 7th of 1882. And 1882 is like the perfect year for me. That's my favorite time, this favorite history. That was the peak of the Gilded Era. So much was changing that with the Industrial Revolution, electricity, telephone, radio. It was in its way as dramatic a change in the way people lived as we've gone through the information age. So I just love that period of history. And November 7th also happened to be election day. It was a midterm election, but still, I thought, wasn't this fascinating? I can do a whole lot with this. So I decided that was the earthquake I was going to use to send Emma, my main character, back to. So then I thought, okay, I have the mechanism, but what I need next is what I'll call a portal. So if you can go to the next slide. I decided Cave of the Winds. I mean, cave, what could be better than that as a portal? As many of you locals may know, Cave of the Winds has been open to the public since 1881. So historically, it would have been a place people could get to by 1882. So I thought, well, that'll be the portal that I'll use to make this all work, to send Emma back in time. And I just, think there's a lot of metaphor around caves too, that appealed to me. So that was kind of the big inspiration, and then one thing kind of led to the next. And that's what I love about writing historical novels, is that you can use the history as inspiration all along. And I have done, not only in the whole story. So, Lynn, you and I were talking about this picture on the right. It's by Jackson, took that picture. He was a local photographer of the era.
Yeah, William Henry Jackson is a famous Colorado, well, out west photographer. Yeah, I enjoyed that part of the story. Okay, so you mentioned that you were inspired by some real people that lived in Manitou. Was there one person in particular that stood out to you?
Yeah, in fact, if you can go to the next slide, that person, I fell in love with her. Her name is Dr. Harriet Leonard. This is a real person. I want to thank Joyce Leonard Rector, Dr. Leonard's great-great-granddaughter, who I found through all the connections. Lynn, actually, you were the starting point, but one thing led to another through various folks there locally that helped me out. And I met on the phone Joyce Rector. We had a nice chat, and she's given me permission to share some of what I learned from her in that call. But this is a picture of the doctor, and she had, I guess, kind of a reputation for being, I don't know if feisty is the right word, but headstrong might be the right word, based on her great-great-granddaughter's description. And I can believe it, because she went to the Keokuk College for Physicians and Surgeons, got her MD from that organization, or that institution, which was part of the State University of Iowa, I'm sorry. And it's an artifact of that she was even able to go to medical school. When the Keokuk College for Physicians and Surgeons became part of the state system in Iowa, state law opened state institutions to women. And so that was kind of the loophole, if you will, that allowed women to study at that medical school. And they opened their doors to students in 1870, and 37 students enrolled, and 8 of them were women. And I think, based on the timeline I've built for Dr. Leonard, that she probably was in that class, one of the early classes, because of things that I know about her subsequent years and where she was. So, she was a pioneer in more than one way, right? So I just was fascinated by this woman, that she was a woman. She got her MD. She went to Manitou at the time when it was just a nascent community. And if we can go to the next slide, I found this picture online, and I don't know if this is a picture of the Keokuk Medical, faculty and students. There wasn't an exact date on the photo, but this little blowout that I have of the female in the background, I imagine, I don't know, but I like to think that it might have been Harriet Leonard, because of the shape of her face, and her general build kind of resembles the prior picture. So in my mind, that's Harriet. I'm until somebody proves me differently. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. So Harriet. One of the things that drew me to her is when I first learned of her. I learned about her in one of the historical books, actually published, I think, by the Manitou Springs Historical Center, and written by Deborah Harrison. But she was mentioned there as being a physician there in the area, and I learned later that she managed and ran the bathhouse. Now, at the time, I had thought that she was referring to the Queen Anne bathhouse, which we'll get to here in a bit. But what I learned was that Dr. Leonard was actually the proprietor of the very first bathhouse of Manitou, which not everyone may know, but if you can go to the next slide. There's some evidence here that I found that I just wanted to go back just one for a second, Lynn. Yeah, okay. I just wanted to kind of show the audience that, through city directories and census records, and not so much newspaper ads, but I was able to find Dr. Leonard advertising for her bathhouse. The first one that I found was in '78, and then there was another one. I can't see the date because I've got my face in front of that next thing, but I think it was in 82 or 83. But by 84, she's not part of the bathhouse anymore. She's part of her own private boarding house. And I thought, well, what happened? And that's when I pieced together the story of the bathhouse, which we'll get to here in a second. But in 1880, they were in the area, she, her husband, and a couple of her children. Her husband in real life was a miller. In fact, he was the master miller, as in, making flour out of grain miller. And he was actually the master miller at the mill in Denver, ultimately. Just an anecdote about Dr. Leonard and her personality. She, even though she lived in Manitou, she believed in hot baths, the hot water. And the springs, as you know, in Manitou are not hot. There are some in the area that are, but not in Manitou. So her son was a boiler maker back east, more nearly east in Iowa or Illinois. And she actually talked him and his family into coming to Manitou to make her a boiler for that bathhouse so she could have hot water from Navajo Springs. So anyway, let's go to the next slide.
Barb, before we do, I was really surprised by the title of electrician.
Oh, yes.
I found that ad in an old city directory from 1879, and it just struck me as funny why she would call herself an electrician. Yeah, that was it's kind of an antiquated term in this context. Back then, as electricity was starting to come into play, the medical community kind of decided maybe it could be used for therapeutic purposes. They still do, to a large degree today, use electricity for therapeutic purposes, but in this case, they had all these contraptions like belts you could wear, baths. In this case, Dr. Leonard specialized in electric baths, which sounds, like probably something you don't want to do. But right. It was they just used these weak batteries, and they grounded, or they isolated the person, kind of, and they just ran a very low amount of energy, electricity through people. And so they were called electricians back then. And she struggled to make a living as a physician. As you can well imagine, in the time, people weren't flocking to female doctors. And so in some respects, she had to find a niche for herself. And this was the niche that she gravitated to. Yeah, so you mentioned the bathhouses. A lot of our local historians will be real familiar with the Queen Anne style bathhouse that was ultimately replaced by the one that's there now. But what did your research reveal about the bathhouses in Manitou?
Yeah, so now I'm all, fixated on the bathhouses in Manitou and probably others as I start going down that rabbit hole. But this picture here on the top right is the picture of the first bathhouse of Manitou, which was built in 1872. In other words, it was probably one of the first structures because, you know, the area wasn't founded until 71 or 72. So that thing that looks like a rundown bunkhouse was the first bathhouse, the one that Dr. Harriet Leonard ran. And I found a record here, which I posted for the interest of the audience, that, you know, it was built in 72. It was originally operated by my research by George Hanley. And I put that caveat there because there's some conflict in my research on that. But this record indicated it was George Hanley and then James Spencer. And then around 78, which is consistent with our other records, it was Dr. Harriet Leonard. And she was the one that was basically running the place when the businessmen of the area decided they wanted a feature, like a modern featured bathhouse in the area that could be used to attract more tourists, because Manitou Springs was always intended to be a resort town. It's not like other Western towns where you know, like, you know, Virginia City or Dodge City or something like that, or Westwood, or, you know, this Deadwood. I'm thinking it's not like that. It was always intended to be a resort. The founders were taking advantage of the advent of the railroad to do something out west, similar to the Saratoga Resort back in New York. And in fact, they were often compared. You know, Manitou Springs has been called the Saratoga of the West, but they decided they were going to build this new bathhouse. The project started in 1882. And my research, I thought Dr. Leonard was also affiliated with that, but I could not find any evidence of it. When I spoke to her great-great-granddaughter, she confirmed that no, Dr. Leonard was never part of what we call, or what the local people might know of as the Queen Anne bathhouse, or the second bathhouse of Manitou Springs.
Yeah, that one kills me. I mean, it was right on Mountain Creek and it had to be flooded constantly, you know.
Well, it doesn't look like in great shape, and these are really old
No.
photographs, you know. So this is the second bathhouse, and really the one that's referred to in my book, Time Springs Eternal. And I love this building. Captivated my imagination when I first saw it on the cover of the historical walking tour brochure.
Right.
And I don't want to offend anyone on the call or in your community or with the center, but this actually, we'll talk about this a little later. The brochure said it was built in 1881. And the newspaper record clearly shows that it was not even a concept until 1882, and in fact was built in 1883 and opened in July of 1883. The total cost of the project was about $20,000. They did use a local architect, W. Ellis. You know, back then they never gave you anybody's first name; it was always initials. So I'm going to pretend his name was William. It could have been anything, but I don't have his first name. W. Ellis is as close as I could get. And the contractor, and Lynn, I'm going to have to ask you, is Eli, or because I can't see it from the way my screen is laid out. Could you read the contractor's name for us, please, if you can see it?
Oop. Yeah, Mr. Eli Johnson.
Eli Johnson. I thought his name was Eli. And so he was also a local contractor. So I found it interesting that they did keep this project pretty, you know, close to home as far as the resources they used to design and build it. This is a kind of a collage of the building in its various times of its life. If you can see in both the top right and the bottom left, there's a smokestack in the back of the building. They actually had their own little power plant because they too wanted heated baths. So that little, right there, that little structure behind the building was a little power plant they used for that purpose. And then on the bottom right picture, as I said, that there was a grand opening on July 16th of 1883, or was it June? I'm sorry, I'm going to have to move my face here. June 16th. And I think I don't know for an absolute fact, but based on the number of people and the context of that lower right picture, I think it might have been taken on the day of the gala. There's banners and lots of people. There's obviously a celebration going on there.
Yeah, blown up, you can definitely see musicians out on the balcony and can't really see the faces that well, but I'm pretty sure this was the actual grand opening.
Yeah, certainly something going on that day. I just love this building. I'm not going to go into a whole lot more detail about the details of the architecture and the interior and that type of thing, because that kind of plays more into future books. Because right in the book one, it's just kind of underway. The idea of it is just underway.
It's so beautiful. I can't believe they actually tore it down.
W.F. Ellis, by the way, has at least one existing structure in the Colorado Springs area. This picture was taken from the walking tour of Colorado Springs. So if you're in the area and you want to go by North Cascade, that building is a surviving building designed by W.F. Ellis. But getting back to a moment for tearing things down, it's a shame that there's not more of the historic buildings in Manitou Springs. Not all of it was because people had no regard and tore everything down. Some of it was because of fires. A lot of really nice buildings were destroyed by fire. Fire was, as you guys know, a big deal when everything was built from wood and people were just starting to use gas, not always still using burning in their homes and that type of thing. So a lot of buildings suffered from fire back in those days.
Yeah, this home here is in the old North End, still standing. So it's a beautiful example. Love that veranda. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and I'll ask you, what was really your greatest challenge in writing this book and why?
The greatest challenge was I very much wanted, it was very important to me to have the Native American perspective, an indigenous perspective in the book. And the what we call the Ute Indians, they call themselves the Manitou, but what we call the Ute Indians were the Indians that were predominantly in the area. This map here shows their territory and their hunting grounds before the Europeans came and sort of rearranged the map for them. But I have many books and I have many resources that I have looked into to learn about these Native Americans. And it was difficult for me because of the way I talk about history in my book. We'll get to that too in a sec, but I wanted to really know what their life was day to day, not generally where they hunted, generally what they hunted, generally who they interacted with. I wanted real details, and it's really hard to get that level of detail. And I also really wanted to be as authentic as I could to their language, and that was the thing that really was challenging. It's an at-risk language anyway because there's so few people who speak it now. And then the expert that I found on the language isn't a Nuchu Van at all. He is a professor at the university, or was a professor at the University of Oregon, who wrote the definitive books on both the grammar and the dictionary of the language. So I had all of that, right? And I was doing my best. I'm not primarily a linguist. I'm not really particularly strong at language, other than English, I hope. But I've come through all of that, and I just couldn't figure out how to pronounce the words. The phonetics they were using were unfamiliar to me, as the ones that I'm familiar with in the dictionary, and so that was difficult. So finding their day-to-day, really no kidding way of life, and then trying to figure out how did they actually pronounce the words that I wanted to use was really difficult. But I kind of decided, you know what, I'm going to come at this with all the best intentions. I'm going to do my best. I've actually reached out to a couple of Ute people to help me, and I appreciate and respect that might not be something they want to do. Who am I, right? What why would they share their intimate history with me? but I did want to do it. I wanted to include that point of view, and I decided I would rather do that at risk, doing my best, than to take that point of view out of the books. So my main character, if you want to flip to the, is I've named him, right? I thought, well, I want to give him a name that's not silly or caricature-ish. So I found a list of historic leaders of the different bands, and the one that kind of popped right out at me, I just liked the name, was Ansha. So in this list, he's
Right
circa
here.
1809 in the Muache band, and I thought, well, that's the name I'll use, because at least I have some reason to believe that's an authentic name, right? And then, of course, I wanted him to have some companionship. He's may not be revealing too much to say that in this story, he has elected not to go with the rest of his people to the reservation, and he's sort of living off the land in the vicinity. And so I wanted to give him, a dog. Well, I thought, well, what would my character name his dog? Wouldn't name him, Spot or, Champ or something like that. I thought, well, I like the idea that he would name his dog Bear. So I did a whole lot of work. I must have spent 20 hours figuring out what's the right word for bear in the language, and how do you pronounce it. I had to figure out how to write it, so that somebody could read it in a way that made sense. And so that was an adventure. By the way, it's they usually stress the second syllable in a word, and we tend not to do that. So it's kind of hard to get used to that cadence. But bear in the Nuchi language is Quiagut, not Quiagut, like I would tend to want to pronounce it. And so that's the name of the dog. And that was, I wanted to, okay, I feel pretty confident about that. I also learned in my research that, the story of Manitou and how it got its name was this idea that the Native Americans believed that the springs were the breath of the spirit, and the healing qualities of the springs were a gift from the spirit. And so the name Manitou is alleged to be, and it is maybe a Native American word, but it's not the Ute Native American word for the creator. Their word for the creator is Sinawav, and they don't usually pronounce the I. It's silent or very just kind of breathed incidentally, Sinawav. And so I kind of found that interesting, because I like the word Sinawav. I'm like, that would have been a pretty name too. I mean, Manitou's lovely, and I like it very much. But I just think back to, if I were a Native American of the area, maybe I would have wanted it named Sinawav if it was going to be named after a spirit. So that was the most challenging part of my research, was just trying to be as true as I could be to the Native American people.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I appreciate the amount of research you went into that. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the writing process for you. This is your first novel, but do you have a sense of how many books that you'll do in this series?
So there's a long arc, right? I've got this poor woman stuck in time, and she's, not really happy about it, to be honest. And so, the arc is what do we do about that? How does she resolve that problem? That arc of the story will take 4 books to resolve, and it will be resolved. I'm not going to leave people. I don't know about you, but I've read series where people kind of violate the contract, if you will. They get y'all interested in what's going on with the characters, and then they either drop them all together or take some sharp turn away and don't resolve it for you as a reader. I'm not going to do that. So she will figure this out one way or the other. But it's going to take 4 books to do it. Beyond that, I don't know. I mean, if it goes beyond that, if it's episodic, we don't have a long arc, or if a new arc starts, or I don't know. But this arc will take 4 books.
Wow, that's aggressive. So I hear you're working on book 2. Do you have a title for book 2? And
yes, book 2 is underway. The title of it is Yesterday's Tomorrow, which, to be perfectly candid, is already a revision from the first title. This is the cover, by the way. And shout out to Becky Fox. She is my cover artist, and she did the artwork for the first book too. And I'm just thrilled I'm just thrilled with it. But
That's
the
great.
original title was Yesterday is Tomorrow. And this is how sometimes creative things happen, I guess. It didn't want to lay out on this, on the cover. It wasn't playing nice. We couldn't figure out, well, does the is go on the first line, the second line, in the middle? What do we do? And I'm like, let's just get rid of the problem and do a conjunction here or and I like the double entendre. So it was kind of yet another example of a happy accident, in my opinion. So that's the title, Yesterday's Tomorrow. Do you want me to give a little preview of the?
Yeah, I mean, without giving it away, obviously we can see that the Queen Anne bathhouse is featured on the cover, so that's intriguing.
Yeah, so she's kind of gotten on her feet a little bit from being thrown back in time. So she's settling in somewhat, but she is not she's not entertaining the idea that she's staying. Her focus and her obsession is to get back to her own time. So she's focused on figuring that out, but she's still got to live day to day, and she's got to balance those demands. So her job actually is going to take her on a train trip back east, and so she's going to hop on one of those trains and head back east for basically to do some promotion of the bathhouse in the Manitou area. And so there's a lot of things that happen to her along that way. And then there still will be a mystery. This, if I were to put it on a spectrum of, is it more historical novel or more mystery, I'd probably put it a little bit more toward historical novel, but there still will be a mystery in this novel.
Okay. Good to know. Well, we're looking forward to book 2 for sure.
And it should be out in the fall.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, the first book came out the end of October, and that's the plan for this one as well.
Okay. Well, what actually sets your novel apart from other historical novels that we've read?
Well, my experience, and I like reading historical novels, it's one of my favorite genres. So I have noticed that most historical novels have a big backdrop historically. They are maybe the World Wars, World War I or World War II, or the Holocaust, or the plague, or big things that they use as a backdrop. In my case, I am very local. The history is very local, and it's very much what impacts the people locally in the story, and how it is day to day for them to live where they are. So I spent quite a lot of time grounding. Manitou is a small community even to this day. So it's very grounded in what's going on in Manitou, and maybe, as it pertains to them, beyond. But really, it's a micro view of history as opposed to a macro view that you get so much in historical novels.
So with that in mind, I mean, did you ever have to adjust the facts to fit the story, or vice versa?
Yeah, in fact, I alluded to it earlier. When I first kind of started getting the idea for the book, I thought, well, this bathhouse was there in 1881, and the earthquake happened in 1882, so I can use that bathhouse as an element in the first book. But when I did all my basic research and I learned that didn't exist until built until 1883, I thought, okay, now what do I do? Do I take poetic license on history and declare it in place in 81 or 82? Or do I stay true to the history and work around it? And so I decided that I would stay true to the history and work around it. I was been out of shape about that for a little while, until I realized that my book was working out better, with the workaround. So I thought, okay, I'm going to relax with some of this. If it happens, I'm going to use it, do my best, right, to work it in. And with all due respect, and I mean this sincerely, to the Leonard family, when I was so excited about Dr. Leonard, and I really wanted to celebrate her in my book, and when I spoke to her great-great-granddaughter, she said, you know, the family would prefer you not use her real name. I mean, it's not a secret that my character's based on her, but they were okay with that. But they didn't necessarily want me using her name in my novel. And I was a little disappointed about that because I'd fallen in love with the woman. Yeah, well, you know, that's fine. I mean, I have no problem with it. I can see why a family might not want that. And when I first thought of doing Dr. Leonard, I didn't believe she had living relatives. I had actually done her family tree on ancestor.com. What I didn't know about ancestry.com is they don't tell you about living relatives. So none of us, if we go back to an older person, will find living relatives, I understand now. But I didn't know that then. Be that as it may, she asked me not to use Dr. Leonard's real name. So I thought, all right, I chose a name that has some meaning for me to represent that character. But then that also freed me up because there's things I'm going to want to do with that character that really had nothing to do with the real story of Dr. Leonard. So I learned that that's okay too. So both times that I've had to work around what I wanted turned out better than what I wanted anyway. So it's a lesson.
Well, speaking of real names, you write under the pen name of Rutherford Case, not Rutherford, but Rutherford. Why did you decide to write under that pen name, and what's the significance of it for you?
Yeah, so thanks for the Rutherford, because many people, when they see that, they say Rutherford. And actually, Rutherford Case is a name derived from my grandmother's maiden name. So it's a combination of one grandmother's maiden name and the other grandmother's maiden name into a new name. So it to me, it's a symbolic kind of acknowledgement and respect for my female ancestors. I mean, all my ancestors are important to me. All my relatives are important to me. But, you know, women, let's just be honest, they get short shrift in history. Dr. Leonard was an example. It was appalling how little was written about her in she lived in that area her whole life. And she was written about, as far as I can tell, twice, once when she had a tea party and once when she died. And so that, you know, I just kind of take opportunities when I can find them to honor my female ancestors and family.
Okay, well, as far as writing, did you always want to be a writer? And, you know, what advice would you give to anybody who wants to do that?
You know, I wanted to be a writer, but not the same way you hear people saying, I always knew I wanted to be a singer or an actor or a fill in the blank. It wasn't that kind of a clarity of purpose. It was always a desire when I was a kid. I mean, I was blessed all the way around. My family, my grandmother was an English teacher. My family, you know, reading was a core value in my family. In Wyoming, when I would go visit my family, I was a night owl, and you know, everybody went to bed when the sun went down. Like, are you kidding? So I would go up to the loft bedroom, my uncle's old bedroom, and read my mother's old Nancy Dream mysteries. And there was a west-facing window, and I would look out over Laramie Peak and pretend I was Heidi from, you know, the story Heidi. But anyway, yeah, so reading and writing were always, you know, big interests of mine. And I wanted to be a writer, but not as badly as I wanted to make a living. So I did other things for a long time, but now I'm at the point in my life, and that story, I wasn't kidding when I told you, Lynn, that story would not leave me alone. In fact, this year it was like, okay, one thing or the other is going to happen. We either admit we're not doing it or we're doing it. And the story said, we're doing it. So I'm like, all right, I guess so. So yeah, that's, I had some aspirations younger, but when it came to making a living, the practical needs of that prevailed for most of my life.
And you and I have talked a little bit about your writing style, you know, outline form versus another form. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so just as I've learned, as you know, going along, the writers have a term for one versus the other. People who are highly organized and outline their books to the nth degree are called planners, and people who don't are called pantsers, meaning flying by the seat of their pants. And
Okay.
I've learned that I'm actually a little of both. And I'm going to be geeky for a minute. I spent many years as a program manager, and there's a thing in that world called rolling wave planning, where you have a big plan that has major things that you have to get done on a schedule, but kind of the things and, you know, the details only get worked out every so often, 6 weeks or 3 months or something like that. So that's how I ended up doing my novels. Like I have a general, like high things that I know need to happen, but the stuff in the middle, I plan out maybe 3, 4, 5 chapters ahead. And the story tells me, I don't tell the story. I'm just like, what do you want to do? And half the time, that's why I don't like to say too much, because I don't know, maybe it's not going to go that direction. I think it will. And then when I get there, it does something different. And that's another reason I chose to write under a pen name. I didn't want my ego to be in this story. I mean, by definition, your ego's in the story because you're using your own experiences and worldview and that kind of thing. But my name, I didn't want my name attached for 2 reasons. I thought, I don't want to feel like my ego is involved here, one way or the other, whether it's wildly successful, not at all successful, or somewhere in the middle. I don't want my ego to be worried about that. The story is the thing that matters here. So that's another reason I chose to write under a pen name. But yeah, this rolling wave thing is what's working for me. And I like it because I find out almost, not much more before the readers what's going to happen.
That would drive some type A people crazy. But, you do what works for you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I appreciate that insight. And that's all the questions that I have. So if you have a question, again, you can put it in the chat room or the chat area of Zoom. I see a couple of comments in chat at the moment, but I don't see any questions. Also, if you would prefer to just speak it, we can unmute you and you'll be on center stage. But I do have a comment that the Wyoming gang is indeed Elvira, Dean, and Connie.
Yay.
Not really gunslinger names, but okay.
Well, I would say that my gang is more not so much gunslingers as ranchers and farmers.
Okay. Well, again, if you have any questions, now's the time. Oh, okay. We have a question from Brenda that says, would you be willing to speak to book clubs who read your book? My book club is planning to read it.
I'm thrilled that your book club's planning to read it. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm involved in a nonprofit here in town that helps youth aging out of foster care. And they are planning on doing a book club with their members, and I have offered to speak with them as well. So yeah, absolutely. I'm willing to do that.
Great. Do you know Brenda?
I do.
Okay. Anyone else? Don't be shy. If we don't have any other questions, maybe if we have time, you might want to read a passage from the book, or?
Well, there's one book here, or another question I see. What do you hope people will learn from this book?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So I hope my first goal is for it to be fun to read. I'm not trying to, it's not War and Peace. It's not, it's not high literature. That's not my goal. But I do hope that people get a feel, right, for different perspectives, the female perspective in the 19th century, especially from the point of view of someone who comes from our time and can really feel the difference. The Native American perspective, just how people entertain themselves back then. We stick our noses in our phones or the TV or whatever, and people back then didn't have that. So they relied on one another and more than we person to person, real kind of interaction. So just really mundane in many respects, but I hope that it evokes some, emotion and some perspective from different points of view.
Another question from Brenda. Does each book have its own sub-arc?
Well, yes, in the sense that each book, if you only read one of any of the books, I hope you would not go away frustrated. There's a story within the story that gets finished up, right? So in that regard, it has its sub-arc. but I personally resonate with books that have good, strong characters and I get interested in what they're doing with one another. Where are the relationships going? How are they interacting? What kind of personality does each character bring to the whole? I find that kind of thing interesting when I read. So that's, in that respect, the characters all of them have a more of a long arc, but each story can stand on its own.
So I know that you didn't do this in a vacuum. You had some help from local people, and I see some of them on the phone here today, and that's great. Were there people in particular that you credited in your book?
There were, I credited you and the folks from the Heritage Center, Deborah Harrison, who was with the Heritage Center when I first started the research. And then I spoke to her when I was picking it up again for book one. And then learned, of that she was no longer working there in the same capacity. And then Lynn, you connected me with John Posada, who I think he's on the call. And thank you, John, because not only were you a big help in connecting me with Dr. Leonard's great-great-granddaughter, but I just love your site, your Facebook group. The pictures there have been my ongoing source of inspiration. It's just been great to have that resource.
It's Manitou eye candy. That's what
yeah,
it
is. It's just I just love it. And then Dr. Givon from the University of Oregon that I referred to earlier, I wrote to him several times, exchanged emails to make sure I was getting, things right with the language of the Ute language. So he was a big help as well. And my friends, I've got wonderful friends. They've all been very supportive. Some of them did some beta reading for me for the first book. Some of them are doing that again for the second one. And that was helpful too. So, there's many people, and I think I even said that in my acknowledgments. No one creates in a vacuum. I didn't. I might have gotten some kind of inspiration from wherever ideas come from, but all of the rest of it, I had help.
Okay, any other questions from the audience? Okay, I have one from Rhonda. Any advice for other people hoping to write books close to their hearts who may not necessarily aspire to national fame?
Well, this is a great time to be living in many respects. Things that I love about the information age is YouTube. First of all, YouTube is like my university. If I wake up one day and I'm curious about something, I might spend the whole day on YouTube looking into it. And now in the day we live in now, self-publishing is really quite, I won't say it's easy because I did a lot of homework on that as well, but it's certainly an option. And in fact, even fairly commercially successful writers often will make that choice to self-publish for many reasons. And so I'm self-published. I have a publishing company, but it's my publishing company. And I did it for a lot of reasons. It was, again, the story's like, I want to be told. I'm like, all right. And it was, at that point, to me, it wasn't anybody else's business, whether that gets done or not. It was between me and the story. And so I thought, I'm publishing it, and then I don't have to fight with anybody about whether it's getting done or how it's getting done or what schedule it's on, or, whether the front cover looks like this or that. As anyone who knows me will not be surprised to learn, I wanted to do it my way. So that was the easiest thing to ensure that would happen. And then, let the chips fall where they may. My feeling is the story wants to be told. I'm going to tell it. After that, it's none of my business. But getting back to, if you feel that way about a story and it's in your heart, and there's nothing out there to prevent you from doing it. If there's no practical requirements that you have to make a certain amount of money, and you're not looking to be famous necessarily from it or whatever, there's the path to self-publishing is there, and it may take a little while to figure it out. And if you have any more specific questions about how to do that, dash them off, and I can fill you in more. But yeah, self-publish. It's not, nothing should stop you from telling your story.
Yeah, I was shocked that you did it in record time, so.
It was record time from your perspective.
Many nights from your perspective.
I see a question here. Are there any authors that influenced me? I mean, they all kind of blend together, to be honest, because I can't even tell you how many books I've read in my life, right? But when I was young, I just loved mysteries. That's all I read were mysteries. And I read, when I was really young, in middle school, I read, after I got done with all the Nancy Drew mysteries, I went on to a writer called Phyllis Whitney, who wrote both young adult and kind of romance novels for adults. I never was really into romance, but her mysteries for young adults I loved. And then I moved on to Dorothy Sayers and Agatha Christie and Nio Marsh and Marjorie Allingham and all the old classic, mystery writers. So I read all of those. And then I started reading more historical novels. So all of them influenced me to some degree. I wouldn't say that there's any one author that I think of when I want to emulate that author. They've all played a role in how I ended up where I am right now.
You told me that even as a middle schooler, you had an opportunity to speak with one of the famous writers. You mentioned Judy Blume, but I don't know if you actually spoke.
Yeah. So I don't know if we have anyone on the call from my hometown, but we were blessed with great teachers. Where I was raised in Greenville, South Carolina, and when I was in middle school, we had I had an English teacher and a librarian who worked together and decided they were going to let kids. And you have to remember, this is a while ago, right? When I was in middle school, they decided if the kids would take the initiative to read at least 3 books of a particular writer, that they would try to get that person to participate in a conference call. So I did that, right? And I was involved with a conversation with Judy Blume, Madeline L'Engle, and then I nominated myself and a friend nominated Phyllis Whitney, and we spoke to all 3 of those authors on a conference call. And I even corresponded briefly with Phyllis Whitney. And the second time she said, "You're a lovely child," or whatever, but I can't be your pen pal. I've got too many correspondences to keep up with. And she was very nice about it, much nicer than that. Yeah. But yeah, so that was another enriching experience.
Wow. Comment from Rhonda, she loves Phyllis.
Oh, yay. Yeah, she lived to be like 105 years old, Rhonda. Did you know that? She just recently died.
Oh my gosh. Okay, any other questions or comments? Oh, was that her real name?
Phyllis A. Whitney is Phyllis A. Whitney's real name, yes. And her middle name is a Japanese word that escapes my memory right now, but she was born in Japan. And her middle name was a Japanese name for some type of flower. I can't remember the name right now off the top of my head.
Okay.
Just I know at one point you didn't ask, but I don't mind telling people my real name. Like I said, my pen name is in honor of my family, but my real name is Barb Loftus, and I'm not ashamed of Barb Loftus either. I just wanted to, like I said, I wanted to have some distance between my ego and the story.
Yeah, I think I blurted it out inadvertently there too, but I think you have a lot of friends on the phone anyway, but it just was.
Yeah, it's not a secret. Some people choose to write under a pen name because they want to remain anonymous.
Yeah.
That's not my primary goal.
Okay, well, time check, we're right at the top of the hour. So we can wrap it here now, unless there's additional questions, or Barb, if you have any other comments or.
No, I mean, I really just appreciate again the opportunity. This has been a lot of fun for me. I mean, who doesn't love talking about something they've spent months and months researching? And then I also just want to say that per our discussion earlier, Lynn, I think we're going to put my my writing Facebook page link on the slide presentation for the when you post it on the site, the Manitou Springs Heritage Center site. So if anybody out there wants to follow my Rutherford Case Facebook page. I this morning posted the cover for book 2. So my goal there is to have my followers on that page get insight or get information a little sooner than everyone else. So if you're interested in that, then
Yeah,
follow me there.
you have no idea that cover art is literally hot off the presses. I mean, so you guys are one of the first to see it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I did it just a
love
little
it.
bit, like 2 hours before on my Facebook page, but this is the second group to have seen it.
Okay.
And then later today, I'll be putting it on Amazon as a pre-order, maybe tomorrow. We got until end of October before it'll be available, but it might be, available for pre-order soon.
Okay, well, we're getting a couple of thank yous and looks like a wrap. So I really appreciate everyone coming today and listening to our interview with Rutherford Case, and hope to see you at another online event at the
Thank you,
Manitou Springs
everybody.
Heritage Center.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.